All right, folks, on to achievement number 2, Roman aqueducts. Here's where we're going to see the use of the concrete that we talked about and the arches to be able to build this structure. Now, aqueducts, when you Google it, you're going to see a structure that looks a lot like this picture. It looks like a bridge with the arches underneath, but aqueducts are actually just a way of carrying water from a great distance, sometimes 30, 40 miles away, bringing water to a city. And so what you can see when you take a look at this cement structure, that, and we're going to watch some videos to help explain it a little bit, but that's got a tunnel inside it where water's traveling. The water then comes and sits in a tank and waits until people need it in various places. Every home in Rome had water coming to it in a pipe, and you paid for the water based on the size of the pipe coming into your house. So if it was a teeny tiny pipe, you paid less than one that's larger, because as we're going to learn when we talk about social structure, the rich had pools, just like not to swim in, not to bathe in, but just a little visually appealing pool that they might have water, but they did have running water coming into their house. Also, the public baths, which we're going to talk about later this week in these videos, had water coming to it. So you can see you've got fountains where you'd go get your water each day for cooking and for drinking. You've got water at the public baths, and so on. So it's coming from the mountains or from a great distance and bringing water into the city.
Aqueducts are not that complicated in theory. That is, that water seeks its lowest level, and therefore that you can run water down a slope from any area to another area. So that's a pretty simple premise that everybody would have known. But that the practice of creating an aqueduct is another thing.
The Romans engineered their aqueducts to approach the city on a gradual declining angle, or gradient. That gradient was just several inches every 100 feet.
The slope of the aqueduct had to be calculated from great distances, 20, 30, sometimes even 40 miles, from the source in the mountains to the cities themselves. That had to be consistent. They couldn't deviate from it, regardless of what the terrain was.
To maintain the water's precise descent through high mountains, Roman engineers dug perfectly angled tunnels through them. When the pipelines reached low valleys, they were elevated on stone walls. If the walls needed to be higher than 6.5 feet off the ground, the Romans saved building materials while still adding strength by perfecting an ancient engineering concept, the arch.
The arch revolutionized architecture in the ancient world by permitting far greater spans than had been allowable before. They basically changed the spatial conception totally of Roman architecture.
Arches were built around a temporary wooden framework that held each stone in place until the keystone was laid in the center. The keystone evenly distributed weight down each side of the arch, allowing builders to stack additional stones above it.
Arches are improvement upon building just a straight wall in a variety of means, both in terms of their efficiency and in terms of their strength. The arch, of course, takes much less material to build. Arches are very strong at supporting things like roofs and aqueducts and whatever you want to put on top of them.
A 6-mile column of arches carried the Aqua Claudia across the valleys on its way to Rome.
The aqueducts would have had a covered roof, but of course if you could take the roof off, you could see the water like an open river coming down towards the city.
After reaching the city, each aqueduct emptied into 3 holding tanks. One for the public drinking fountains, a second for the public baths, and a third reserved for the emperor and other wealthy Romans who paid for their own running water, a concept that was well ahead of its time.
Basically, every home by the 1st or 2nd century AD of any means had running water. This is astounding because the entire span of the Middle Ages they didn't have.
So what he was saying was all through the Middle Ages, they did not have running water. And that is something that, so they lose the technology or they lose the knowledge or something like that. So a couple of things that I want to point out from that video is the math involved in creating the aqueducts. Because first of all, they have to know how far away the water is coming from. So they have to have some indication of mileage. They probably didn't use that term, but they had a way of marking out the distance. Secondly, they had to know I'm coming from this height and I'm going to this level. So how do I decrease that angle? So it's geometry. How do I decrease that angle so that it reaches the holding tank that I want it to empty into without, because if it goes down too fast, water is not going to climb uphill. Gravity is the force that's making it move. So they're not going to be able to have it move up a hill. So they really had to plan that out a lot. So that kind of technology is amazing. And then again, you saw the arch and how it helped them build above. So lots of arches in a row is a new idea that the Romans borrowed. They borrowed the basic structure of the arch, but then they used it in a new way to conduct this. One more little video I'm going to show you that talks about digging that channel through the mountains.
The challenge for the Roman engineers was to keep the water flowing at the same speed on its entire journey. To get around hills, they dug trenches along the contour lines and covered them with bricks and earth. To cross wide valleys, they funneled the water down through lead pipes and up again on the other side.
Which I don't know how that would work. This surprises me.
To conquer high mountains, they dug deep tunnels right through them and shafts in their roof for ventilation. To cross long distances on even ground, they built flat walls with a trough in the top. And to channel the water into Rome without obstructing traffic, they built the majestic arched aqueducts we know today. These plumbed into a network of fountains that fed water to 1 million Romans. Today, Rome's fountains are still safe to drink from. And because they always keep the water flowing, they stop the city's pipes from clogging up.
Okay, so this kind of shows you an example of how modern water comes into a city if it's coming not from an aquifer, which is an underground water source, but if it is coming from a reservoir. So you can see we have some sort of we have the underground pipe system that they didn't have. Although, can you imagine digging through that mountain and keeping the angle consistent? You had to dig a tunnel, so you have to climb in to that tunnel and make sure that the angle doesn't change. We've got the mechanical pipes and things that can move the water if gravity isn't working for us, which they did not have. This video, I'm going to share with you the entire program. And if you're interested in finding a little bit out about how they know how they were built, this is a video on experimental archaeology, where a group of people have attempted to build an aqueduct the way the Romans would have, so they know perhaps some of the tools and things like that. It's, I think, a 12-minute video, so I'm not going to share it with you now, but it's there if you want to look into it, okay? So because of that concrete and because of the arches, you can see that bridges can span great distances and get very, very tall and still be strong. Because of the three things we've just talked about, the concrete and the arches, and then also the idea of spanning great distances like the aqueduct needed to. All right, your turn. Think about a movement of water in our country or in today's world. How do we move water about? How do we store water until it's needed? We don't have something like an aqueduct bridge in the middle of Janesville, but we still have water coming to us. So how does it do that? Take some pictures, include some ancient aqueduct pictures, and then give your information about how it was used, how it was built, any tools you can think of that might have been needed, and then something that surprised you. All right, and then come on back for topic number 3.